Welcome to this short interview series highlighting the key findings of a joint MERICS European Chamber of Commerce in China report, Decoupling, Severed Ties and Patchwork Globalisation. My name is Grzegorz Stec and I'm a MERICS analyst focusing on EU-China and Central and Eastern Europe-China affairs. For this overview of macro decoupling trends, I'm joined by Max Zenglein, Chief Economist at MERICS, and by Tom Groot Haar, Policy and Communications Coordinator at the European Chamber of Commerce in China. Max, Tom, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me as well.
To start our discussion, let's talk about politics. So, Tom, much of the reporting on decoupling connects it to international political tensions. But is politics in itself a layer of decoupling?
No. Politics is not per se a layer of decoupling. In reality, it rather functions as a catalyst for decoupling trends in other areas of the economy. But it is something that is worrying. We basically have seen an increase of tensions in recent years. Also in the last year, you see, for example, the wolf warrior diplomats on Twitter during the start of the pandemic, but also Chinese disagreements with Australia, Czech Republic, Sweden. And these tensions, they result in distrust, which basically offers a fertile ground for, in this case, decoupling. And I can give you an example how this works. The best example to use here, I would think, is public opinion. And to be specific, a negative public opinion of EU citizens about China. In a recent study of Pew Research Institute, it was mentioned that the public opinion in the EU of China has steadily gone down over the last years. And this actually has pretty far-reaching consequences. For example, it can result, and has resulted actually, in pressure from some consumers on European companies to justify their China operations in general. But also, people should not forget that European countries are democracies. And if the public opinion in on China is negative, it means that this will be heard in parliaments, and they will be encouraged to take a harder stance on China. And this can even go as far as national parliaments refusing to ratify the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, due to a negative image that Europeans have on China. And this was very hard to imagine a couple of years ago. At that time, the image of China was not per se positive, but certainly not as negative as it is now.
And how is this political aspect of decoupling seen from the perspective of European businesses in China? Is there anything that they can do to mitigate those risks?
Well, yeah. European companies are concerned that conflicts between countries over values and systems could potentially have a growing impact on their business operations. And there's an increased anxiety over dynamics of political reciprocity, which basically means retaliation against business for choices that their home governments make. Also, there is an increased risk of getting caught in the middle, which is worrisome. For example, last week, China's Ministry of Commerce introduced new regulations on foreign companies, basically restricting foreign companies from following foreign laws that could hurt the interests of China. It's not known how this will be implemented, but in essence, this could mean that Chinese courts could punish companies that comply with restrictions and sanctions from other countries. And this brings international companies in a very weird place where they have to comply with regulation in the US if they want to keep doing business there. But if they do so, they might get punished by China. As a whole, companies cannot do a whole lot about it except auditing their supply chain and also invest in compliance teams to make sure that they are as compliant as can be to be able to basically accept all surprises that are being thrown their way.
Moving away from the realm of politics, Max, what about the decoupling in the financial sector? Have we seen any substantial development so far?
After trade and tech, it was thought that finance would be the next area of conflict where decoupling will accelerate. But actually, to my mind, this is not the case. And also to what we have found in our study. Sure, there have been some elements where you could think that decoupling is actually happening in finance. So there has been delisting of Chinese companies for New York Stock Exchange, for example. But really here, I wouldn't read too much into this. Because it was always in China's interest also to have its own companies, its tech companies listing in its own financial markets and closer to home. Then there have also been some targeted sanctions against some selected officials as well as companies. But really taking this together, this is really more small scale. And overall, I would say that in finance, China is in the process of integrating itself into global markets. So it's really more of an outlier, even though it might sound counterintuitive. So China has, for example, created new investment channels, both inside into China as well as outside of China, for portfolio investments. They have opened up new areas for foreign companies to operate in China. And this is all part of efforts within China to try to mature its own financial markets, as well as improving capital allocation in the country. So we do not see this decoupling dynamics in the area of finance as of now.
But are there any chances that the financial sector becomes an arena for decoupling? If so, how could it look like?
There could be, for example, if the relations substantially deteriorate, this would be kind of a nuclear option to deploy. This, in some ways, we've seen elements of this deployed by the US against Russia or Iran, but this would really be a fairly radical move, and the consequences would be quite high. So this would mean that Chinese companies would have restricted access through the US financial system and US dollars, and by its nature, then international trade flows will be disrupted. So this would come with substantial economic costs for really anyone involved in global trade. So I don't think that this is really a very likely scenario. I do think that sanctions will be more targeted, as we've seen it to some extent already, but they would remain rather small and more aimed at sending a political signal. And I would question if they would have any significant real economic bite to them. However, I think that China is going to increase its efforts to strengthen the internationalization of its own currency, the RMB, and reduce the reliance on the US dollar as well as US financial centers. So this means that we will see accelerated efforts to use the RMB for international trade, as well as efforts to strengthen its own domestic financial centers, including Hong Kong. But overall, I think this is going to be a rather slow process.
Max, Tom, thank you very much for your great comments. And to our listeners, please be sure to read the full report for a complete picture. You can find it on websites of MERICS and of the European Chamber. Thank you, and until next time.